right. So, of course, welcome, Matthew. Like I said, tonight we're here for the Solar 101, particularly surrounding the 2025 Tucson Solar Co-op. And so, as a little bit of housekeeping, if you haven't already, you can join audio in the bottom left side of the screen, and that'll, of course, allow you to hear me. And then that's where you'll also be able to unmute yourself in the event that you do have any questions. Or if you feel more comfortable with it, you can submit those questions in the chat. And so I'm joined by my colleagues Trinity and Lauren tonight, and they're both going to be putting links in the chat and also answering any questions that might come up, particularly since Trinity is our solar expert, and so they can answer more technical things than usually I can. And then, of course, this webinar is being recorded too, so you will have access to this going forward as well. So I want to start it off first by saying thank you to our partners. We wouldn't be able to have this co-op if we didn't have the support of our partners. And so the three that are joining us in this co-op this year are kind of our evergreen partners of Sustainable Tucson, Physicians for Social Responsibility Arizona, and of course the Sierra Club Grand Canyon chapter. Shout out to Sandy Barr. And then my name is Jess White. I'm the Arizona Program Associate with Solar United Neighbors. And I just started this year, which I say not to undermine your confidence in the knowledge that I have and what I'm imparting today, but to let you know that not that long ago, I was in your shoes. I was asking the same questions about what does going solar look like in Arizona? Is it feasible for me? What is the most economical way to go about it? And so I say that really to emphasize that this is a safe space. And if you have questions, I totally understand your position and why those questions exist, and I'm happy to answer anything. No question is stupid. And so we really want to get to the heart of what it means to go solar and answer any and all questions you may have tonight. So who is Solar United Neighbors? We are a vendor-neutral 501c3 nonprofit. And so kind of what that means is that we are unaffiliated with any developers or installers, and we rely instead on community engagement and involvement. So we're not beholden to any one installer partner, and that really gives us flexibility in being honest and upfront about what obstacles you may face going solar and how to overcome them and make it work for you. And then our theory of change really includes three things, which is helping folks go solar, join together, and fight for their energy rights. So from a national perspective, because we are a national nonprofit with a regional arm, and then through that, a state arm through Arizona, we've helped almost 11,000 families to go solar. And as of today, we confirm that we've helped to deploy over 100 megawatts of solar, which I think is really exciting. And then Arizona specifically, we've been here since 2019. And through that, we've helped almost 600 people to go solar. And that means that 14 million, give or take, has been invested in local solar. But I think an even more powerful number is that helps to save over 25 million over the course of 25 years for those almost 600 families. And through that, it's created 102 good paying jobs in solar. And so a little bit about Sun and how we got started. We were initiated in 2007 by our founder, Anya Schoolman. Her son came back from school and said, "Mom, we have to go solar." And she said, "Okay, let's do it." And through that process, she realized that it was not always the easiest and there were obstacles. And she decided that since she's doing the legwork, she might as well bring all of her neighbors together so they can do it as a group. And that was the start of the first co-op. And now fast forward to 2025, we have members in every single state. And we've run almost 450 co-ops, helping over 10,000 homes to go solar. And so to touch really quickly on our theory of change, which I mentioned before, we have three prongs to that approach. The first, of course, is helping people to go solar. And we do that by supporting people in the process, whether that be through the co-op or it be individually. We help with different resources. We have FAQs. All of our resources are free so that people can feel empowered to make the right decision as to whether going solar is right for them. And then we help kind of cradle to grave in that after you have solar, we don't just fall off the map. We're still a resource, and we're looking to help you to make sure that you're getting the best economics and also just efficacy from your solar system. We also join together, and that comes through solar tours, happy hours, and happy hours being one of my favorite events, but basically just ways in which we are banding together to go solar, but also to be empowered in the community and to fight for solar rights, which of course is our last one. And some examples of what that might look like is fighting for net metering or fighting for community solar. So net metering in this case is a one-to-one transfer of every kilowatt hour that you purchase from your respective utility, which is probably TEP, is compensated at the same rate as any you sell back to them. And we did have that historically in Arizona, and now we don't. And we're always fighting to get that back. And then at the cornerstone of our work is really working for equity. And so we really want to work towards an energy system that works for everyone and is fair and equitable. And that means different things in different places. But here in Arizona, equity around heat, for example, is a huge issue. And so having solar, for example, and its contribution to the equitable energy system in Arizona could mean having solar deployed in times when it's just incredibly hot and your bill might be too expensive to be feasible. Well, solar can offset some of those costs and make it more equitable. And so what we're going to cover today is solar technology, the economics of solar, and basically how our co-op works and how it can work for you. So solar technology, how do solar panels work? So we're going to be talking primarily about solar photovoltaic or PV. That's really the primary goal of the work that we do, but there are definitely things like solar thermal and solar water heating in which you might look into, but I certainly don't have the knowledge to talk about that tonight. But I will talk about our solar panels, which basically take the light and the photons. They dislodge electrons in the semiconducting silicon in particular in the material of the solar cells. And through that, they're able to access the energy of the sun. And the panels are really just the solar cells, and they are encapsulated in glass and with a frame. And the reason for that being is it's really a protectant for what you're truly investing in, which is those solar cells, since that's what's doing the work. And this is critically important because you want to make sure you're protecting those cells so that you're getting the most efficiency from your solar panel. For example, I know somebody in Prescott who went solar through one of our co-ops, and he lives on a golf course, so he's had golf balls hit his solar panels before, but because they're as protected as they are, he still has about 90% efficiency on those panels that have been damaged, as opposed to none in case it didn't have that. The next component is going to be racking. And really, racking is pretty much made for almost every single roof. And ultimately, your installer is going to be able to decide what the best racking system is for you. And so, for example, here on this asphalt shingle roof, you can see that there are these rails, and those solar panels are screwed into or clipped to those racks, which are screwed into your roof. And this technology is always developing. I just recently heard of rail-less solar installation today. And so again, if you're looking for more information on that, ultimately your installer is going to be your technical guru, and they can speak to what is going to make the most sense for your roof. And then what's a good roof for solar? There's kind of actually 4 things that we look at whenever we're determining what roof is good for solar. The first being roof orientation. So the best roof orientation is going to be south facing. Because we're in the north hemisphere, the sun is mostly in the south, like a south facing angle. And so you're going to get the most energy on a south facing roof, but west and east are both very good angles as well. The one that we don't tend to recommend is if you have a north facing roof, because it just doesn't get as much sun exposure as the other 3 orientations. Of course, you're going to want little or no shading if possible. I mean, if you're lucky enough to have shade on your house, that's great, but it does preclude the sun from hitting your panels, and it would require a little bit more finagling of your system to make sure that it is doing what you need it to do. If you do have shading, ways to mitigate that could be thinning out the branches of a tree rather than getting rid of one entirely. And then the last is enough space to mount the panels in the first place. And really, we like to see one big contiguous space on the roof if possible. Again, if you have less contiguous space and you have to do it in different places, that can make the installation a little more complicated, but definitely not impossible. But that's something to determine with your installer and when they give you a proposal. And then last is the age of your roof. So we really suggest your roof be about 10 years or less, preferably, just because these solar systems can last upwards of 25 and more years. And so you're not going to want to have to replace your roof sometime in that period, because then they have to take the panels down and reinstall them, and that can be expensive. So if your roof is older than 10 years, then we recommend having it evaluated to determine its remaining lifespan. An alternative to roof mounted solar is, of course, ground mounted. So this is definitely an option, but it can be a little bit more expensive because you have to get the infrastructure. Instead of having an existing roof on which footprint you're installing the solar, you have to make that on your ground. And then also there's the cost of trenching to make sure that it's connected to your house. All right, so inverters are what I consider the translators of the system, and there are kind of two different ones that we primarily use. There's going to be string inverters, which connect all of your panels, and this is kind of a simple installation. If all of your panels are getting the same amount of sunlight, then you're able to go with the string inverter. Whereas if you're getting different amounts of sunlight on different panels, you would want to invest in micro inverters instead, because those are inverting at the panel level rather than with the string inverter. It's kind of like you're only as strong as your weakest link. And then again, your installer will have a recommendation for which of those makes the most sense. And then from those inverters, which are basically what turn your direct current, or what the electricity is at the panel level, into alternating current, which is what is usable by your appliances, that sends this energy into your electrical panel, which is kind of like the brain of the house. And through that, it'll decide whether or not that energy needs to be sent into the house to power your appliances, or if you have an excess beyond what you're using, it can go into your bidirectional meter and sent back to your utility. So some important terminology. The first, of course, is kilowatts. I probably should have put this earlier, but your system is going to be measured in kilowatts. So in this picture here, you can see that there are 12 panels at 400 watts. So you multiply that 400 by 12 and you get 4,800 watts, or more specifically, 4.8 kilowatts, which would be the sizing of this system. And then kilowatt hours are the electricity produced. It's the energy versus power. So kilowatts is energy and power is energy over time. And then last is kind of our average size system in Arizona is going to be close to 8 kilowatts, but this is a very specific thing to each person's context. You may not need a system that big. You may need one larger, depending on whether or not you're trying to offset all of your energy usage and what your budget constraints are. And then this is kind of a visual to bring everything together. So the array, of course, are your series of panels, and the sun will hit those. The energy will be diverted to your solar inverter, where it's then translated into usable energy, sent to your electrical panel, and then from there, it goes into your house or back to the utility via the utility meter, which is bidirectional. And then to expand a little on what I was talking about before with net metering is that 1-to-1 ratio of every kilowatt you purchase from your utility is then compensated at the same rate as what you send to the utility. And basically, in fact, I'll go ahead and move to this next slide. We no longer have net metering. We have what's called the resource comparison proxy instead. And so that's going to be this solar export credit. That's the resource comparison proxy. So for TEP, any excess kilowatt hour that you send back to the grid is compensated at 5.13 cents, whereas your energy charges can be anywhere from 7.29 to 21.28 cents. So you can see there's a really big discrepancy. Instead of it being 1-to-1, it's somewhere in the order of 1-to-4. So you're paying 4 times as much potentially for your energy as what TEP would be compensating you for. And that's why we think it makes it much more economical to have net metering, and why we continue to fight for it. And then this is just a visual of the solar rate plans, which include time of use and time of use with demand charges. To kind of synopsize what that means, your energy per kilowatt hour is more expensive on the time of use, but you don't have a demand charge. And so with the demand charge, it's cheaper per kilowatt hour, but depending on your usage, you have a potentially large charge. So for example, it's $11, or sorry, that should have been cents, 11 cents and No, I'm wrong. That's $11.60 per kilowatt during your peak demand. So that's going to be the hour during the month when you use the most energy. And so you'll multiply whatever that factor is. So, for example, if you use 3 kilowatts during that period, you multiply it by 1160. So it's going to be like $35. And so you can imagine how that scales up if you use a lot of energy during these peak hours. And so time of use with demand charges can be economical if you're very intentional about your energy use. But the easier one, the time of use, can often be cheaper if you don't want to have to think that hard about your usage during peak hours. And again, feel free to unmute if that doesn't make sense. I know that's kind of dense. And I mean, looking at TEP's solar rate plans, or really any rate plans, is a roller coaster ride. So I'm happy to help in whatever way I can with that, here or offline. And then this is just kind of an example bill using numbers from the previous slide. So you, of course, have your on peak and your off peak multiplied by however much energy you use during those periods, fixed charges. And then here you can see with the solar export credit, you have a credit towards your bill depending on how much you do send back to the grid. And that can offset some of your costs. More than that, though, solar offsets what you're using, so you don't have to buy as much from the utility. That's really where you're saving the most money rather than selling it back to the utility. And then kind of to that effect, our next component is batteries. And so what happens when the power goes out? Obviously, when the grid's down, if you don't have solar, you don't have power. But kind of a misnomer is that when you do have solar, a safety mechanism also shuts your system down. So your solar system isn't powering your house, because we also don't want to be sending energy back to the power lines while folks are working on it. So if you do want power during outages, you would need to invest in a battery. And so just as a quick example of what that looks like, a 13.5 kilowatt battery bank for the Johnsons can be fully recharged over the course of a day. And it can leave them with a full day of power, even in the event of an outage. The only thing is they're very discerning in how they use that energy. So you can choose to put it towards critical equipment, different things that you may use more often, like a refrigerator. Obviously, you want that to stay online, but maybe you don't use your dryer or your water heater during that period to save some of that energy. And so the value of battery storage, of course, is if you do have frequent utility outages, which I certainly hope not with a utility as large as TEP, but you never know. You have critical loads at home. So if you have medical equipment, for example, or you're on a well system and you want to have access to water, that's something to consider. And then, of course, emergency and disaster preparedness. But even more than that, again, it saves you money because you're able to utilize your battery during periods where you may otherwise be purchasing power from the utility. And so it can offset some of that. And in addition, we have what's called a DPP program with TEP. And so a DPP is a distributed power plant, also called a virtual power plant. And basically, it turns each individual house with a battery system into like a teeny tiny little power plant where they are sending energy back to the grid during high peak. And so basically, TEP is launching a program like this where you can opt in or out to have energy from your battery system sent back to the grid during the high peak demand time. So that would be, for example, during the summer between 3 and 7 p.m. And that helps to take some of the strain off the grid. So it's good for our infrastructure. It's good for our neighbors because effectively that energy is going to be helping people in our community. And also you get paid back twice a year as their way of saying thank you for helping to offset the strain on the grid by sending your battery energy into the grid itself. And again, you don't have to do that, but it's a way where you can help to offset some of the costs of going with the battery system. And then for more information, we do have a battery storage guide, which has everything you could ever hope to know about batteries. It's very intensive, but it's a great place to look if you're looking for more information. And then to touch really quickly on a few frequently asked questions, one of them being about warranties. So there's really 3 warranties that most installers provide. The first is going to be a product warranty. And that's going to guarantee the physical integrity of your solar panels and inverters. And so if, for example, a soldered connection on a panel fails, which would adversely affect your solar production, then that panel would be replaced under the product warranty, which are through your manufacturer. And they often offer about a 25-year product warranty. You are going to want minimum 10 years in that kind of warranty. Power production warranties guarantee that the solar panel will produce at a certain rate, but for a minimum of 25 years. So, for example, if that power production warranty guarantees 80% for 25 years, and before that period, your panel's only producing at 50%, that means that once again, the manufacturer has to replace that panel. And so, yeah, those are often pretty lengthy too, and that will help to keep your system running efficiently for a long time. But generally speaking, solar technology has really grown by leaps and bounds. So they do tend to keep their integrity and their efficiency for a very long time. And then the last, of course, is labor warranties, which talk about the workmanship around the solar installation. So if something goes wrong, like the electrical wiring or roof penetrations are leaking, then however long you have that labor warranty, you're able to use that basically to have the installer company come out and to help you with whatever problem may arise. With homeowners insurance, we've had questions about whether or not homeowners insurance will either raise the rates or kick folks off. And the reality is your solar panels are actually, they could potentially extend your roof's life, especially out here in Arizona where it's shading the roof in the places where the sun would otherwise be hitting. It can actually be a boon to have a solar system. So theoretically, your homeowners insurance shouldn't change your premium. If they do, it might be a good time to change insurers. But I will say that in Florida, I recently heard that there was an instance in which the insurance did penalize folks with solar, and the people working through Sun in Florida actually combated that, and eventually they overturned that. So while I hope that that'll never happen here, and we are a much different landscape here than we are in Florida because we don't have hurricanes, that's something we really work towards consumer protection. And so we'll really help folks there to make sure that that option is never taken off the table. With maintenance, for the most part, you can kind of be hands off, but we do recommend getting the solar system inspected every couple of years or so, just to make sure that everything is operating optimally and that there's no issues. And then how long do systems last? Like I said before, it's really a minimum of 25 years. And as solar technology has gotten more efficient and more effective, that longevity has increased, and we expect that to continue. And as far as HOAs or historic districts go, HOAs aren't legally allowed to tell you that you cannot have solar panels, but they can dictate where you have solar panels. So it may be that it's not visible from the road. Similarly, from a historic district perspective, they might be able to decree where it goes, but not whether or not you're able to get solar, because you are legally allowed to regardless. Excuse me. So I'll go ahead and start into solar economics. So again, based on how technology has gotten better, so has solar economics, because it's gotten so much more efficient and through that considerably cheaper. In this diagram, you can see in the 1970s where it was around $100 a watt, which is a crazy number, versus today where we're consistently seeing prices that are $2 to $4 per watt. So it's gone down enormously, and even 73% since 2010, which is a huge drop in such a relatively short period of time. And a lot of this is because it's no longer specialty. It's not just a handful of folks who have solar. A lot of people are invested and interested in this technology, particularly since it is the cleanest and the cheapest, most democratic energy source. So it does continue to be an excellent return on investment. Of course, I starred the 30% federal tax credit here because unfortunately at the end of this year, we'll no longer have access to that. And I'll speak a little bit about that later, but the Arizona state tax credit continues to be something that we can utilize. And so for the cost of solar, you can see kind of the breakdown here is from least to most. Labor costs, so the cost to have the installation done by the installer, system components or the solar panels, inverters, etc. And then the highest is soft costs. So that includes finding leads, and administrative work in the installer's business themselves. And the reason why co-ops can save so much money is because it gets rid of some of those soft costs, because they don't have to find people, they don't have to advertise, we're doing that work for them. And so that decrease in the soft costs on their end then translates to a savings for the people going solar through the co-op. Like I was talking about before with the Arizona solar tax incentives, there's a 25% state tax credit up to $1,000. So if you spend $4,000 or more, you're guaranteed to get that $1,000. Well, it's a tax credit. So if you have taxable income, you're guaranteed to get that tax credit. And then also a property tax exemption, which I think is really cool. And that says that if solar increases the property evaluation of your property, so if your taxes increase as a direct result of including solar in your house, then you're not going to actually have to pay the assessed tax increase. And then the last one is the sales tax exemption. So you don't have to pay sales tax on a solar installation in Arizona, which also saves a considerable amount of money. So of course, the elephant in the room when we're talking about solar is going to be the federal tax credit. So that was 30%. And unfortunately, with the phase out by December 31st, that means that short of talking to an installer right now and ensuring that they are fully confident that they can install by the end of the year, the federal tax credit is very difficult to get at this time, and very soon will be impossible to get and just be kind of wiped out as an option for folks, which is actually one of the reasons why we are pushing our co-ops so much, because you can get such a steep discount that it's worth it to go solar that way without having the federal tax credit, just to make sure that it is more affordable for more folks. And to expand a little bit on that, and why we're getting close to the do or die stage of the federal tax credit and claiming that, is because timeline variabilities surrounding the permitting process, the timing for the utility to interconnect your system, the installer's availability when other people are also trying to go solar to get that tax credit, and around weather issues and the holidays can change that timeline. So if your bottom line says you really want to make sure that you get that tax credit, then I would suggest talking to an installer right now, as soon as possible, certainly, and making sure that you ask the question, do you think that this will be done in time for us to get that tax credit? Because the reality is it is a consumer protection issue as well. We want to make sure that nobody's misleading folks and saying, yes, you can get it if that's integral to your budgeting, and then for you not to get it. And then two things to kind of consider as you're thinking about whether or not you want to go that route is, do you have taxable income? This is not a rebate. So if you don't have taxable income, you don't get a tax credit. And that means, like, if you're on Social Security, for example, you would not be eligible for this tax credit. And then the other thing is whether or not this tax credit will roll over. So historically, if you weren't able to use it in the first year after the installation, you could use it the following year ad infinitum until you used up all of that tax credit. And while we're not tax advisors, and we really highly recommend seeking expert tax guidance, our understanding is that that credit rollover will no longer be in effect. So for example, if you owe $3,000 in taxes next year, but you have this $6,600 tax credit, that means that $3,600 that otherwise would have rolled over before this year no longer will. And so the reality is that ends up being like a 13.6% tax credit rather than the full 30%, since you weren't able to utilize it all, which makes it all the more powerful to go solar with the co-op instead, because on average, we see about 20% savings through the co-op. And so that, of course, is higher than that 13.6%. Okay, as an example, pricing, and also just to show kind of how technology has gotten better over time and solar has gotten cheaper. Just a year ago, we were using a figure of the average Arizona solar co-op pricing being $275, and now it's $250. And so this just shows, minus the state tax credit, and depending on what offset you look at, what some of those prices might look like. And I think the figures that are really important here are how much you stand to get back or to save over the course of 25 years, minus, of course, the original investment. And so if you did 50% offset our models show that you would save $11,000, and if you did full offset, you would save close to 16,000. So, especially in a time like now when TEP is suggesting a 14% increase in their rates, and I can only assume that's slated to continue going forward, solar can be a really powerful way to have a more consistent price on your energy so that you can plan ahead with your budget and your finances. And really quickly, as an example loan, again, with the 50 versus 100% offset, you can kind of see what those figures look like in terms of your savings, where here the minimum saving you're going to see is theoretically like 6,500 over the course of 15 years. So this is 15 versus the 25 years, and that's why that figure differs. And up to almost $10,000 over the course of 10 years. So, like, there's very real savings to be had, and loans are a real way to make solar accessible. And so, some ways you can access loans are going to be through financing through your installer. So, the benefit to that is that because they already have that partnership in place, it's a very seamless process to go solar and to get that finance through the installer's financier. But then there are other options that might have lower credit or not, excuse me, lower APR, so lower percentage. And that could include home equity line of credit. And it could also include a credit union, which is a more local version of many financier. And so if you're trying to keep money in your local economy, which is something that Local First really promotes, for example, then you could go to a local credit union or even a green bank. So there's something called Sheila, for example, that gives pretty sizable loans and good credit or good percentage rates for green and just loans. And also, leasing is still going to be an option for this the solar tax credit. So basically, the commercial tax credit is still going to be in existence until 2027, and that means if you lease, then your installer can still claim that 30% tax credit and apply that to your loan. That said, the devil is in the details. And with leasing, you want to be extra cautious because you don't own the system. And that's really what we try to promote. We think people should own it because it gives you a little bit more equity, gives you more control. And sometimes leasing terms can have adders. So while you may have a cost now, maybe in 10 years it increases or your warranty is no longer in effect. So will the system be repaired? And with it not being yours, will it be repaired as quickly? So these are just some things to think about if you do go the route of leasing, but it can limit the number of obstacles for cost. And that's something to consider too. If you do end up going leasing though, we really, again, recommend looking into the details to make sure you know exactly what you're getting into before you sign on. And then the last part is going to be about our co-ops and how they work. And so first and foremost, why join a solar co-op? You're here, so I'm assuming you're asking yourself that question. And that's because you can get a great value on installation. Like we said before, because that soft cost is considerably lower and that savings can be passed on to people, that makes just the introduction cost to installing solar that much lower. You may not get the 30% tax credit. In fact, we can just about guarantee you won't if you join the co-op, unfortunately, due to the timeline of choosing an installer. But you will get that roughly 20% discount, and you'll do it joining your neighbors and having us as a resource. And we really walk you through the process and make sure that we're crossing our T's and dotting our I's to make sure that you're having the most seamless process and that you're not introduced to any obstacles that can't be overcome. And so, like I said, yeah, support through the process and then also connecting with your neighbors, right? So this is going to be Tucson specific. And so you have a sense of place together and you probably have a lot of the same questions. And so there's that sense of camaraderie that comes with this process. And then also you're helping the momentum of the solar movement in a time when it's so critical, right? Solar is an incredible technology. We really believe in it, not just because of it's proven and is really helpful in the market, but also because we've seen the way it impacts individuals and how it can empower people and save money and help that money be diverted back to their local economy or for folks to do what they want with that money. I think that's really important. And then, so as far as the installer selection goes, like we mentioned before, we're vendor neutral. And so that means we're not the ones selecting your installer, you are. So this is very democratic in the approach. We want to make sure people feel a sense of ownership over the process, and they have the ability to say kind of what your values are. Do you want somebody who's local? Do you want the cheapest person? Do you want the person with the best technology offerings, even if it's a little more expensive, right? You get to decide. It's not one size fits all. And then if you do join the co-op, this is kind of a breakdown of how it works. So with Learn, you're here doing that right now, attending a free solar co-op info session where we kind of walk through some of these processes. And honestly, we are a free resource all the time. So if and when you have questions, we're here for you too. And then once you sign up online, we really ask that you spread the word. We're only as powerful as our membership, so more people equals more power. And we want to make sure we help the broadest breadth of people. Then in November, we're going to select an installer. And through that, we do a competitive request for proposal process, which really goes through all the different metrics of the installer's offerings. And then we explain those to the selection committee. And through that, an installer is chosen. And then ultimately, the people who sign up for the selection committee get first grab at getting a solar installation. And so what that means is that they'll send you a proposal from the installer. You get to decide, like, okay, which technology do I want? Do I want a bigger system than what they're suggesting or smaller? Or is this exactly what we're looking for? And then after you decide kind of what you want, you can sign a contract, but there's no obligation to go solar if you do join our co-op. So that means if you decide, you know what, now isn't the time for me, then that's completely fair too. There are no penalties. Like, this is a community thing, and we really want to help folks whether they go solar or not. And I think that's really one of the most important things that Sun does, is that we love solar, but we love people more. And so we encourage it, but we also completely respect folks' decision not to go solar, because solar isn't for everyone, and we recognize that. After your solar array is installed, after everyone's is installed, then we'll have a party. So, right, that's the join together element and what really makes us powerful in the work we do. So what's next? And that'll just be to join the co-op if you haven't already, and then to tell other folks as well, so that other people have the opportunity, hopefully, to join in this work. And then if you're really excited about the mission, we always are looking for volunteers, whether that is for our action team, so people who are working to change policy in Arizona that benefits solar and folks who have gone solar. And that can be anything from that policy work to even just taking photos and videos at different events or sharing on social media. So with that, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I hope this hasn't just been a complete info dump, and that this has been helpful for you. And I'll open up to any questions you may have.